Sometimes the most life-changing discoveries happen when we least expect them. In 1952, a simple land purchase in the rugged hills of Arizona would forever alter the lives of two families from completely different worlds. What began as a business transaction would evolve into a story of compassion, resilience, and the profound impact one act of kindness can have across generations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Arizona landscape as Robert Bob McKenzie stepped out of his pickup truck and surveyed the property he had just purchased. The year was 1952, and the Korean War was raging overseas while America was experiencing post-war prosperity. Bob, a weathered man in his 40s with calloused hands and sun-beaten skin, had spent the last 15 years building his cattle ranch from nothing. His dream was finally within reach, expanding his operation to include this additional 640 acres of prime grazing land in the Sonoran Desert foothills. The real estate agent, a nervous man named Harold Fitzgerald, had been unusually eager to close the deal. The price was almost too good to be true for such a substantial piece of land, even if it was considered remote and difficult to access. Bob had asked few questions, focused mainly on the water rights and grazing potential. The agent had mentioned something about a small structure on the property that would need to be demolished, but Bob hadn't given it much thought. Old mining shacks and abandoned homesteads were common throughout Arizona, remnants of dreams that hadn't quite materialized. As Bob walked across the rocky terrain, his boots crunching on the dry earth, he could see why this land had remained undeveloped. The access road was barely more than a dirt track, winding through scrub brush and mesquite trees. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the earth like ancient monuments, and the nearest neighbor was more than 10 miles away. It was perfect for cattle, isolated with natural windbreaks and several seasonal water sources. The isolation that made it unsuitable for most development made it ideal for his purposes. After walking for nearly an hour, Bob finally spotted the structure the agent had mentioned. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. Calling it a small structure had been generous. The building was little more than a collection of weathered boards, rusted tin, and salvaged materials that had somehow been assembled into something resembling shelter. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, held up by what appeared to be a collection of mismatched posts and beams. Gaps between the boards were stuffed with rags, newspaper, and what looked like mud and grass. But what truly caught Bob's attention wasn't the decrepit state of the building. It was the thin wisp of smoke rising from a makeshift chimney and the small vegetable garden planted in the sandy soil nearby. Someone was living here. Bob approached slowly, his mind racing. The real estate agent hadn't mentioned current occupants. According to the paperwork, the land had been vacant for years, part of an estate settlement from a mining claim that had gone nowhere. As he got closer, he could see that despite its ramshackle appearance, the little dwelling showed signs of careful maintenance. The small garden was neatly tended, with rows of beans, squash, and corn struggling to grow in the harsh desert soil. A few chickens pecked around a small coop made from scrap wire and wood. Before Bob could decide how to announce his presence, the door of the shack opened. A woman emerged, followed by 3 children of varying ages. The woman appeared to be in her 30s with long black hair braided down her back and weathered hands that spoke of hard work. Her dress was simple and patched in several places, but clean. The children stayed close to her, their dark eyes watching Bob with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Good morning," Bob said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had drilled into him decades ago. "I'm Bob McKenzie. I believe there may be some confusion. I just purchased this land and I wasn't aware that anyone was living here." The woman's expression didn't change, but Bob noticed her hands move protectively toward the children. She spoke in accented English, her voice quiet but steady. "My name is Maria Yazzie. These are my children, Joseph, Anna, and little Thomas. We have been living here for 3 years." Bob felt his stomach drop. 3 years. This wasn't a case of someone camping temporarily or squatting for a few weeks. This family had made this place their home. He looked around again, this time noticing details he had missed before. Laundry hung on a line strung between 2 mesquite trees. A small pile of firewood was stacked neatly against the side of the shack. The children's faces were clean, their clothes patched but cared for. "Ma'am," Bob said carefully, "I don't mean to cause any trouble, but I have the deed to this property. I bought it from the county just last week. Do you have some kind of arrangement with the previous owner?" Maria shook her head slowly. "There was no previous owner living here. The land was empty when we came. We built this house with our own hands, my husband and I. But he—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the ground. "He died 2 winters ago. Fever. Since then, it has been just us." Bob felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. a widow with 3 young children, living in what could barely be called shelter, on land that he now legally owned. He looked at the children again. The oldest, Joseph, appeared to be about 12, with serious eyes that seemed too old for his face. Anna looked to be around 8, staying close to her mother's side. The youngest, Thomas, couldn't have been more than 5, clinging to his mother's skirt with small, dirty hands. "Mrs. Yezi," Bob began, then stopped. He realized he was about to ask this family to leave the only home they had known for years. The words died in his throat. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of wind through the mesquite trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Bob found himself studying the little homestead with new eyes. It wasn't much, but it represented something profound, a family's determination to survive against impossible odds. The garden, small as it was, showed careful planning and hard work. The repairs to the shack, makeshift though they were, had been done with obvious care and attention to detail. "Mackenzie," Maria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "we have nowhere else to go. My husband's family, they did not approve of our marriage. They live far from here on the reservation, and they made it clear we were not welcome. My family." She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "They are gone, all gone. This place, it may not look like much to you, but it is all we have." Bob shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing through his options. He could insist on his legal rights. After all, he had paid good money for this land and had every right to it. He could offer to help them find somewhere else to go, maybe give them a little money to help with the transition. He could contact the county and see if there had been some mistake in the paperwork. But as he looked at the 3 young faces watching him with barely concealed fear, Bob found himself thinking of his own children back home. His son Jimmy was about Joseph's age, and his daughter Sarah was close to Anna's age. What would he want someone to do if his family found themselves in such desperate circumstances? "Mrs. Yazzie," Bob said slowly, "what tribe are you from?" "Apache," she replied, lifting her chin slightly as if expecting some kind of reaction. "My husband was Apache too. We met when he was working on a ranch near Tucson. The owner there? He was a fair man, treated the Apache workers well. That's where I learned to speak better English." Bob nodded. He had worked alongside Apache ranch hands before and had always found them to be reliable, hard-working people. The prejudice against Native Americans was still strong in Arizona in 1952, but Bob had been raised by parents who judged people by their actions rather than their ancestry. "How do you manage here?" Bob asked. "I mean, how do you get supplies, food, things like that?" Maria gestured toward a small area behind the shack where Bob could now see an old pickup truck, its paint long since faded, and its body showing numerous dents and repairs. "The truck still runs most of the time. Once a month, I drive to Tucson to buy what we cannot grow or make ourselves. I sell vegetables at the market there, and sometimes I clean houses for people. It is not much, but we manage." Bob was impressed despite himself. Managing to survive in this isolated location with 3 children, making regular trips to town for supplies, maintaining a garden and caring for livestock, it was no small feat for anyone, let alone a woman alone with young children. "The winter before last," Maria continued, "when my husband died, I thought we would have to leave. But Joseph, he is strong for his age, and Anna helps with everything. We made it through. Then last winter was easier because we knew what to expect. This winter," she looked at the sagging roof of the shack. "This winter, I am not so sure." Bob followed her gaze and could see what she meant. The structure was clearly failing in several places. The roof would probably not survive another heavy rainstorm, let alone the weight of snow that occasionally fell in this part of Arizona. The walls were held together more by determination than by any structural integrity. "Mrs. Gwynn." "Yazzie," Bob said finally, "I need some time to think about this situation. Would it be all right if I came back in a few days? Maybe we can figure out something that works for everyone." Relief flickered across Maria's face, though she tried to hide it. "Yes, Mr. Mackenzie, we will be here." As Bob walked back to his truck, his mind was spinning. He had come here today, planning to survey his new land, maybe mark off some areas for fence lines, start planning where to build a line cabin for his ranch hands. Instead, he had stumbled into a situation that challenged everything he thought he knew about property rights, family obligations, and basic human decency. The drive back to his main ranch took over an hour, giving Bob plenty of time to think. His own spread was successful enough. He ran about 500 head of cattle on 2,000 acres, had a comfortable house for his family, and employed 3 full-time ranch hands. The addition of this new acreage would allow him to expand his operation significantly, maybe run another 200 head. It was a sound business decision. But the image of those 3 children stayed with him. The way young Thomas had clung to his mother's skirt, the serious expression on Joseph's face, the quiet dignity with which Maria had explained their situation. These weren't people looking for a handout. They were a family trying desperately to survive on their own terms. When Bob arrived home that evening, his wife Ellen could tell immediately that something was troubling him. They had been married for 18 years, and she could read his moods like a weather vane. Over dinner, with their own children chattering about school and friends, Bob found it difficult to concentrate on the conversation. After the children had gone to bed, Ellen poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Bob at the kitchen table. "All right, Robert Mackenzie, what's eating at you? You've been quiet as a stone all evening." Bob told her about his discovery, the family living on the land, their circumstances, the impossible situation he now found himself in. Ellen listened without interruption, her face growing more thoughtful with each detail. "So what are you thinking of doing?" she asked when he finished. Bob shrugged. "I honestly don't know. Legally, the land is mine. I have every right to ask them to leave, but Ellen, you should have seen that place. They're living in conditions that would make our barn look like a palace. And those children." Ellen was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You know," she said finally, "my grandmother used to tell stories about the early days, when people helped each other survive out here because they had to, when having neighbors, even miles away, meant the difference between making it through hard times or not." "This is different," Bob said. "These aren't neighbors helping neighbors. This is me potentially giving away part of what I worked hard to buy." "Is it different?" Ellen asked. "Think about it, Bob. This woman and her children have been surviving on that land for 3 years. They've improved it, cared for it, made it their home. Doesn't that count for something?" Bob had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Ellen's voice had somehow made it more real. "The practical side of me says I should help them find somewhere else to go, maybe give them some money to get started somewhere. The emotional side." "The emotional side says what?" Bob sighed. "The emotional side says that if something happened to me, and you were alone with Jimmy and Sarah, I'd hope someone would show you the same kindness I'm thinking about showing them." Ellen reached across the table and took his hand. "So what's really holding you back?" Bob thought about it. "I guess I'm worried about setting a precedent. If word gets around that I let someone stay on my land without paying, what's to stop others from trying the same thing? And there's the practical matter of liability, property taxes, all the legal complications." "Those are valid concerns," Ellen agreed, "but they're not insurmountable. You could draw up some kind of arrangement, something that protects both of you legally, but gives them security." Over the next 2 days, Bob found himself thinking constantly about the Yazzie family. He discussed the situation with his ranch foreman, Miguel Santos, a man whose judgment he trusted completely. Miguel listened thoughtfully and then offered perspective that surprised Bob. "Boss," Miguel said, "my family came here from Mexico 3 generations ago. We know what it's like to be outsiders, to have people look at you like you don't belong. But we also know what it's like when someone gives you a chance to prove yourself. Maybe this is your chance to do that for someone else." Bob also spoke with his lawyer, Frank Morrison, about the legal implications of allowing the family to remain on the property. Frank confirmed Bob's concerns about liability and potential complications, but also suggested several ways to structure an arrangement that would provide protection for both parties. "You could offer them a lease arrangement," Frank suggested. "Charge them a nominal rent, even $1 a year would make it legal. Include provisions for maintaining the property, following local codes, that sort of thing. It would give them security while protecting your interests." The more Bob thought about it, the more the idea appealed to him. But he also realized that simply allowing them to stay in their current shelter wouldn't be enough. The structure was clearly failing, and with winter approaching, the family would be in real danger. On the 3rd day, Bob made his decision. He loaded his truck with tools, lumber, and supplies, and drove back to the Yazzie property. When he arrived, he found Maria working in the garden while the children helped with various chores around the homestead. "Mrs. Yazzie," he called out as he climbed down from the truck. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I have a proposition for you." Maria straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. The children gathered around her, their faces showing a mixture of hope and apprehension. "First," Bob said, "I want you to know that I'm not going to ask you to leave. This is your home, and you've earned the right to stay here through your hard work and dedication." The relief on Maria's face was immediate and overwhelming. She actually swayed slightly, and Joseph stepped closer to steady her. However, Bob continued, I can't let you continue living in that structure. It's not safe, especially with winter coming. So here's what I'm proposing. I'm going to help you build a proper house. Nothing fancy, but something solid and safe. In return, you'll sign a lease agreement that gives you the right to live here and farm this plot of land for as long as you want to stay. Maria stared at him in shock. Mr. Mackenzie, we cannot pay you rent. We barely manage to buy food and supplies as it is. The rent will be $1 per year, and in exchange, you'll help maintain the property and help out with my cattle when they're grazing in this area. I think it's a fair trade. For a moment, Maria couldn't speak. Then tears began to flow down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. Joseph stepped forward, his young face serious but hopeful. Mr. Dole. Mackenzie, the boy said in careful English. My mother says yes. We all say yes. And we promise to work very hard for you. Bob looked around at the family, at Maria struggling to compose herself, at Joseph standing tall and proud despite his youth, at Anna smiling for the first time since Bob had met her, at little Thomas hiding behind his mother's skirt but peeking out with curious eyes. Well then, Bob said, unloading his tools from the truck, I guess we'd better get started. The construction of the new house began the very next morning. Bob arrived at dawn with a truck full of building materials and his ranch foreman Miguel, who had volunteered to help with the project. The sight that greeted them was both heartening and amusing. Maria and her 3 children had already begun clearing and leveling the area where Bob had suggested they build the new structure. Joseph, despite being only 12 years old, worked with the determination of someone twice his age. He had already moved several large rocks and was struggling with a stubborn mesquite stump. Anna, 8 years old and fierce in her own way, was carefully sorting stones into different piles, flat ones for potential foundation work, round ones to be moved away, and smaller ones that could be used for various purposes. Even little Thomas at 5 years old was doing his part by gathering kindling and small branches that had been cleared from the building site. They started before sunrise, Maria explained, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. We could not sleep, knowing that today we begin building our real home. Bob was touched by their enthusiasm, but also concerned about the amount of work they were taking on. Mrs. Yazzie, this is going to be heavy work. You don't need to... Mr. Mackenzie, Maria interrupted, her voice firm but respectful. You are giving us more than we ever dreamed possible. The least we can do is work alongside you. My children and I, we are not afraid of hard work. Miguel smiled and began unloading lumber from the truck. Boss, I think we're going to need to work hard to keep up with this crew. The first order of business was determining the best location for the new house. Bob walked the area with Maria, discussing the advantages of different spots. They needed to consider drainage, wind protection, morning sun exposure, and access to the existing well that Maria's late husband had dug behind their current shelter. Carlos, my husband, he chose this area because of the natural windbreak from those rocks, Maria explained, pointing to a formation of large boulders that would indeed provide protection from the harsh winter winds that swept across the desert. And in summer, the mesquite trees give shade in the afternoon when the sun is hottest. Bob nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the placement. Carlos might not have had formal education in construction, but he had understood the land and its challenges. They decided to build the new house about 50 yards from the current shack, in a spot that would take advantage of all the natural benefits Carlos had identified while providing room for future expansion. The foundation work was backbreaking. Arizona's desert soil was deceptively difficult to work with, hard-packed in some areas, sandy and shifting in others, with rocks scattered throughout. Bob had brought a pickaxe and several shovels, but even with multiple people working, progress was slow. It was during this first day of digging that Bob truly began to understand the strength and character of the Yazzie family. Maria worked alongside the men, swinging a pickaxe with determination and skill. When Bob suggested she might want to take breaks or focus on lighter tasks, she shook her head firmly.
Mr. Parlago.
Mackenzie, I helped Carlos build our first shelter with these same hands. I am not delicate. Young Joseph surprised everyone with his stamina and intelligence. Not only could he work for hours without complaining, but he also seemed to have inherited his father's understanding of construction principles. Several times he made suggestions about the foundation layout that were both practical and insightful. If we dig this corner a little deeper, he said at one point, studying the layout, it will be more level with the other corners when we account for that slope. Miguel checked Joseph's observation and found the boy was absolutely right. "Kid's got a good eye," he told Bob quietly. His father must have taught him well. Anna's contribution was different but equally valuable. She appointed herself the official water carrier, making sure everyone stayed hydrated in the desert heat. She also took charge of organizing tools and supplies, keeping everything neat and accessible. Her attention to detail was remarkable for such a young child. Little Thomas provided something perhaps even more important. He kept everyone's spirits up. His excitement about the new house was infectious, and his constant questions and observations provided entertainment during the hardest moments of the work. "Mr. Brooke." "Bob," he asked during a break on the second day, "will our new house be big enough for a Christmas tree?" Bob looked down at the earnest little face and felt his heart constrict. He realized that these children had probably never had a proper Christmas, living as they had in such difficult circumstances. "I think we can make sure there's room for a Christmas tree, Thomas," Bob replied. "In fact, maybe this year you all can come to our house for Christmas dinner." The look of wonder on Thomas's face was worth every hour of back-breaking labor. As the work progressed, Bob found himself learning as much as he was teaching. Maria shared traditional Apache techniques for desert living that were both practical and ingenious. She showed them how to identify which plants could provide materials for various purposes. Certain grasses for insulation, specific tree branches that were ideal for construction, desert plants that could be used for waterproofing. "My grandmother taught me these things," Maya explained as she demonstrated how to weave grass into tight bundles for insulation. "She said that the desert provides everything you need if you know how to look for it." Bob was amazed by this knowledge. He had lived in Arizona all his life, but Maria understood the land in a way that was both deeper and more practical than his own understanding. He began to realize that this arrangement was going to benefit him as much as it benefited the Yazzie family. The house they were building was modest by most standards: 3 rooms, a kitchen area, a main living space, and 1 bedroom. Bob had also planned for a small storage room and a covered porch that would provide additional living space in good weather. But for a family that had been living in a 1-room shack, it would be a palace. By the end of the first week, they had completed the foundation and begun framing the walls. Bob was impressed by how quickly Maria and Joseph had picked up construction techniques. Joseph in particular seemed to have a natural aptitude for carpentry, carefully measuring and cutting boards with a precision that rivaled experienced workers. The project had also attracted the attention of Bob's other ranch hands. Word had spread about what Bob was doing, and on the weekend, 2 of his employees showed up to volunteer their time. Manuel Gutierrez, who had worked for Bob for 5 years, brought his teenage son to help. Jake Thompson, Bob's newest hire, contributed both labor and materials. He had access to windows and a door through his brother-in-law's construction business. "Boss," Manuel said as they worked on raising the frame for the main wall, "what you're doing here, it's a good thing. My family, we came here with nothing, and people helped us. Now we can help others." But it wasn't all smooth progress. On the 3rd week, a severe thunderstorm swept through the area, flooding the construction site and damaging some of the work they had completed. Bob arrived the next morning to find Maria and Joseph already at work, bailing water and assessing the damage. "We can fix this," Joseph said matter-of-factly, studying a section of framing that had shifted in the flood. "The foundation is still solid." Bob was struck by the boy's resilience. Where many people would have been discouraged by the setback, Joseph simply saw it as another problem to solve. Maria's attitude was equally pragmatic. "The desert gives and takes," she said with a shrug. "We know this. We build again." The delay caused by the storm turned out to be a blessing in disguise. During the time needed for the construction site to dry out, Bob and Maria spent long hours planning the interior of the house and discussing the future of the property. These conversations revealed Maria's intelligence and practical wisdom. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said one afternoon as they sat on the porch of the old shack, watching the children play, "I have been thinking about ways we might help your ranch operation. This land, it has good grazing, but it also has other advantages you might not have considered." She went on to explain that the property sat along a natural migration route used by wildlife, making it potentially valuable for hunting leases. She also pointed out several areas where the soil and water conditions would be ideal for growing hay, which could provide feed for Bob's cattle during dry periods. "Carlos and I, we always plan to expand beyond just survival," Maria continued. "We talked about raising sheep as well as the few cattle we had. Sheep do well in this terrain, and there is good money in wool if you know the right buyers." Bob found himself taking notes as Maria outlined her ideas. Her vision for the property was more comprehensive and sophisticated than his own had been. He had seen the land primarily as additional grazing space, but Maria understood its potential in ways that could significantly increase its value. During this period, Bob also learned more about Maria's background and the challenges she and her family faced beyond simple poverty. The prejudice against Native Americans in 1950s Arizona was real and pervasive. Maria told him about difficulties she had encountered trying to enroll the children in school, problems getting fair prices for her produce at markets, and the constant suspicion and hostility they faced when they went to town for supplies. Some people, they look at us and see only what they expect to see, Maria explained. They do not see that Joseph reads better than most children his age, or that Anna can calculate prices and make change faster than most adults. They see only Apache, and they think this means we are not civilized. Bob was ashamed to admit that he had not fully understood the extent of these challenges. While he had always tried to treat people fairly regardless of their background, he had not realized how difficult simple tasks like shopping or accessing services could be for Native American families.
Mrs. Sack?
Yazzie, he said, when you need to go to town for supplies, would it help if you went as a representative of my ranch? I could give you a letter of credit with the merchants I deal with. They know me and trust my business. The relief on Maria's face was immediate. That would help very much, Mr. Mackenzie. Sometimes I have to visit 3 or 4 stores to find someone willing to sell to me at fair prices. As construction resumed after the storm delay, Bob made a decision that would have long-term implications for both families. He asked Maria if she would be interested in taking on additional responsibilities for his ranch operation in exchange for a small salary. I've been watching how you manage things here, he explained. You're organized, you understand the land and the animals, and you're good with people when they give you a chance. I could use someone to help coordinate activities on this section of the ranch, keep track of cattle movements, manage supplies, that sort of thing. Maria's eyes lit up with interest. I would like that very much. But what about the children? Joseph is old enough to help with ranch work after school and during summers. Anna could help with record keeping. I've noticed she's very good with numbers. And Thomas? Well, Thomas can just be Thomas and brighten everyone's day. The arrangement they worked out was mutually beneficial. Maria would receive a modest salary for managing ranch operations on the eastern section of Bob's property, which included the Yazzie homestead. The children would help with age-appropriate tasks and would be paid small wages for their contributions. In return, Bob would provide materials and assistance for continuing improvements to their property. But perhaps most importantly, Bob offered to personally ensure that the children received proper education. Joseph and Anna had been attending school irregularly, often missing weeks at a time due to transportation difficulties or because they were needed at home. Thomas had never been enrolled at all. Education is the key to everything, Bob told Maria. These children are bright and capable. They deserve every opportunity to succeed. Bob arranged for the children to attend the school in town, providing transportation through one of his ranch hands who made regular trips. He also spoke personally with the school principal, making it clear that the Yazzie children were under his protection and should be treated with the same respect as any other students. The impact of this intervention was dramatic. Joseph, freed from the constant worry about basic survival, threw himself into his studies with remarkable dedication. His teacher reported that he was reading at a high school level despite his limited formal education. Anna proved to have an exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science. Even young Thomas, once he overcame his initial shyness, thrived in the school environment. By late November, the new house was nearing completion. The structure was solid and well built, with thick walls that would provide excellent insulation against both summer heat and winter cold. Bob had insisted on several features that went beyond basic shelter: a stone fireplace for heat and cooking, built-in storage areas, and large windows that would fill the interior with natural light. The finishing touches revealed Maria's artistic talents. She had insisted on doing all the interior painting herself, using traditional Apache patterns and colors that transformed the simple rooms into something beautiful and unique. Her decorative work was so impressive that Bob found himself bringing Ellen and their children out to see it. Maria, Ellen said, admiring a geometric pattern that Maria had painted around the main room. This is absolutely beautiful. Have you ever considered selling your artwork? Maria blushed at the praise. It is just decoration, Mrs. Raw. Mackenzie, something to make the house feel like home. It's much more than that, Ellen insisted. This is real art. I know people in town who would pay good money for work like this. The conversation planted a seed that would grow into another opportunity for the Yazzie family. Ellen, who was active in various women's groups and social organizations in town, began talking about Maria's artistic abilities. Within weeks, Maria had received several commissions to create decorative pieces for homes and businesses. The day finally came to move the family from their old shack to the new house. It was a celebration that involved both the Mackenzie and Yazzie families, as well as several of Bob's ranch hands who had contributed to the construction effort. The contrast between the old shelter and the new house was dramatic. Where the family had once lived in a single room with a leaking roof and gaps in the walls, they now had a comfortable, well-built home with separate spaces for different activities. Joseph and Anna would share one bedroom while Thomas slept in the main room near the fireplace. Maria would have her own space for the first time since her husband's death. But perhaps the most emotional moment came when little Thomas ran through the new house, his voice echoing off the solid walls as he called out, "Listen! Listen! The house talks back to me." The sound of his own voice echoing in the sturdy rooms seemed to represent everything the new house meant to the family: permanence, security, and the possibility of a future they had hardly dared to dream about. As winter settled over the Arizona desert, the Yazzie family faced their first season in their new home. The difference was remarkable. Where previous winters had been struggles for basic survival, this winter was an opportunity for growth and planning. Joseph threw himself into his expanded ranch duties, proving himself capable of handling responsibilities that impressed even Bob's experienced hands. Anna excelled in school and began helping Maria with the artistic commissions that were providing additional income for the family. Thomas continued to charm everyone he met with his enthusiasm and curiosity about the world around him. But it was Maria's transformation that was perhaps the most remarkable. Freed from the constant anxiety about her family's survival, she began to reveal capabilities and ambitions that had been suppressed by years of hardship. Her ideas for improving and expanding the ranch operation proved to be both practical and profitable. Her artistic work gained recognition throughout the region. Most importantly, she began to carry herself with a confidence and dignity that reflected her true intelligence and strength. As Christmas approached, Bob found himself reflecting on the unexpected turn his life had taken. What had started as a simple land purchase had become something much more significant, a partnership that benefited everyone involved and a relationship that was enriching both families in ways that went far beyond financial considerations. Christmas Day 1952 dawned crisp and clear across the Arizona desert. At the Mackenzie Ranch House, preparations for an unusual family celebration were underway. For the first time in their lives, the Yazzie children would experience Christmas as Bob's family had always known it, with a decorated tree, wrapped presents, and a feast that seemed impossible after years of subsistence living. Ellen Mackenzie had spent weeks preparing for this day, working with Maria to blend traditional Mackenzie family Christmas customs with Apache traditions that would help the Yazzie children feel connected to their heritage. The result was a celebration that was both familiar and entirely new for both families. When Bob arrived at the Yazzie homestead that morning to escort them to Christmas dinner, he found the family dressed in their finest clothes, garments that Maria had been working on secretly for weeks, using fabric she had purchased with earnings from her artwork. Joseph wore new trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking remarkably mature for his 13 years. Anna was beautiful in a dress that incorporated traditional Apache beadwork with modern styling. Thomas, nearly bursting with excitement, wore a miniature version of Joseph's outfit and couldn't stop grinning. But it was Maria who took Bob's breath away. She had created for herself a dress that was both elegant and distinctly Apache, incorporating traditional colors and patterns in a way that was sophisticated and stunning. Her long black hair was arranged in an elaborate style decorated with turquoise jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked like a different person from the frightened widow Bob had first met 9 months earlier. "Mrs. Yazzie," Bob said, removing his hat, "you look absolutely beautiful. All of you do." The Christmas celebration at the Mackenzie house was a revelation for everyone involved. Bob and Ellen's children, Jimmy and Sarah, had initially been curious about the Apache family their parents had been helping, but by the end of the day, lasting friendships had been formed that would endure for decades. Joseph and Jimmy, despite their different backgrounds, discovered a shared love of ranching and horses. Sarah and Anna, close in age, found common ground in books and learning, with Anna's mathematical abilities complementing Sarah's love of literature. Thomas charmed everyone with his infectious enthusiasm and constant questions about everything he encountered. During the gift exchange, Bob presented each of the Yazzie children with something that represented both practical help and recognition of their individual talents. For Joseph, he had commissioned a set of professional leatherworking tools, recognizing the boy's aptitude for craftsmanship. Anna received a collection of advanced mathematics and science books, along with art supplies to encourage her creative side. Thomas got a set of children's books and a wooden horse that Bob had carved himself. But the gift that moved Maria to tears was not for her personally. Bob handed her a legal document that he and his lawyer had been working on for weeks, a formal agreement that gave the Yazzie family permanent rights to their homestead and the surrounding 20 acres, with the option to purchase the land at a nominal fee if they ever chose to do so. "Mr. Mackenzie," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is too much. We cannot accept." "You've already earned it," Bob interrupted gently. "Your work this past year, your ideas, your contributions to the ranch, you've more than earned the right to call this place home permanently." The legal agreement was more than just security for the Yazzie family. It represented Bob's recognition that the arrangement had evolved into something far more valuable than a simple landlord-tenant relationship. Maria had become his partner in managing the eastern section of his property, and her insights and hard work had increased the value and productivity of the entire operation. As 1953 began, the transformation of the Yazzie family's circumstances became even more apparent. Joseph, now firmly established in school and excelling in his studies, had also begun taking on significant responsibilities in the ranch operation. His natural affinity for working with cattle and horses, combined with traditional Apache knowledge passed down from his father, made him invaluable in managing livestock in the challenging desert environment. More importantly, Joseph had begun to emerge as a leader among the other young men in the area. His quiet competence and reliability had earned the respect of both Anglo and Mexican ranch workers, who began seeking his advice on matters related to desert ranching techniques. Anna's academic achievements had attracted attention from teachers throughout the region. Her mathematical abilities were so advanced that she was working with high school materials despite being only 9 years old. Her teacher, Mrs. Fenney Henderson, had written to several universities inquiring about special programs for gifted students. But Anna's interests weren't limited to academics. She had inherited her mother's artistic talents and had begun creating detailed drawings of desert wildlife and plants that were both scientifically accurate and artistically beautiful. A local naturalist who saw her work suggested that she might have a future as a scientific illustrator, a field that perfectly combined her mathematical precision with her artistic gifts. Thomas, now 6 and fully settled into school, had become something of a local celebrity. His teacher reported that his enthusiasm for learning was infectious, helping to motivate other students. His natural curiosity and fearless approach to new experiences had also made him a favorite among Bob's ranch hands, who competed to teach him new skills and share their knowledge with the eager little boy. Maria's evolution was perhaps the most dramatic of all. The shy, frightened widow Bob had first encountered had been replaced by a confident woman who was gaining recognition throughout the region for both her artistic work and her expertise in desert agriculture and livestock management. Her artistic commissions had grown from occasional decorative work to major projects for hotels, restaurants, and private homes throughout Arizona. Her distinctive style, which incorporated traditional Apache motifs with contemporary design sensibilities, had attracted attention from art dealers in Phoenix and Tucson. But it was her agricultural innovations that were having the most significant impact. Working with Bob, she had developed new techniques for desert farming that increased crop yields while conserving precious water resources. Her methods combined traditional Apache knowledge with modern agricultural science, creating approaches that were both environmentally sustainable and economically viable. The success of these innovations had attracted attention from the University of Arizona's Agricultural Extension Service. Professor David Reynolds, a specialist in arid land agriculture, made several visits to the Yazzie homestead to study Maria's techniques and document her methods. "Mrs. Yazzie," Professor Reynolds said during one of his visits, "what you've accomplished here could revolutionize farming throughout the Southwest. Have you ever considered sharing your knowledge through formal teaching or publication?" The suggestion sparked an idea that would have far-reaching consequences. With Bob's encouragement and support, Maria began documenting her techniques and the traditional knowledge she had inherited from her Apache ancestors. Her notes became the foundation for what would eventually become a comprehensive guide to sustainable desert agriculture. As 1953 progressed, the success of the arrangement between Bob and the Yazzie family became increasingly apparent to the broader community. Other ranchers began asking Bob about his methods, curious about how he had managed to increase the productivity of what had previously been considered marginal land. Bob was honest about the role Maria and her family had played in the improvement. "I provided the opportunity," he would tell inquiring neighbors, "but Maria provided the knowledge and the work ethic that made it successful. Any rancher would be lucky to have a partner like her." This openness about the partnership helped to gradually change local attitudes towards the Apache family. Where they had once faced suspicion and hostility, they now encountered growing respect and acceptance. The Yazzie children were no longer seen as outsiders in school, but as valued members of the community. The transformation wasn't without challenges. There were still some people in the area who disapproved of Bob's arrangement with the family, viewing it as either misguided charity or dangerous precedent-setting. Occasionally, the children faced harassment or discrimination, though these incidents became less frequent as the family's contributions to the community became more widely recognized. One particularly difficult situation arose when a group of local businessmen approached Bob with concerns about the precedent he was setting. They worried that his generous treatment of the Apache family might encourage other Native Americans to settle in the area, potentially creating what they saw as problems for the community. Bob's response was firm and unambiguous. Maria Yazzie and her children have proven themselves to be valuable members of this community, he told the group. They work hard, pay their taxes, contribute to local businesses, and treat their neighbors with respect. If other families want to follow their example, I'd welcome them. The conversation was uncomfortable but necessary. It forced Bob to articulate clearly why his arrangement with the Yazzie family was not just charity but a mutually beneficial partnership based on merit and contribution rather than ethnicity or social status. As autumn approached, Bob made a decision that would cement the long-term relationship between the two families. He offered Joseph a formal apprenticeship in ranch management with the understanding that the young man would eventually take over responsibility for the entire eastern section of the property. "Joseph," Bob explained, "you have all the skills and knowledge needed to run a successful ranch operation. More importantly, you understand this land in ways that took me years to learn. I'm getting older, and I need someone I can trust to help manage the expanding operation." The offer represented more than just a job. It was recognition of Joseph's capabilities and an investment in his future. At 14, Joseph would become one of the youngest ranch foremen in the state, but Bob had no doubts about his abilities. Joseph's acceptance of the position marked a turning point for the entire family. For the first time since Carlos's death, they had not just security but genuine prosperity. The salary from Joseph's new position, combined with Maria's income from her artwork and agricultural consulting, elevated the family from subsistence to middle-class comfort. More importantly, the arrangement provided a clear path forward for all the children. Anna's academic abilities had earned her a scholarship opportunity to a preparatory school that would prepare her for university study. Thomas, still young but showing signs of intellectual gifts similar to his siblings, would have access to educational opportunities that had been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. The success of the Yazzie family also had unexpected benefits for Bob's own operation. Maria's agricultural innovations had increased the carrying capacity of his land, allowing him to run more cattle on the same acreage. Her artistic work had brought positive attention to the area, with visitors often stopping by the ranch to see her creations, and sometimes staying to purchase cattle or other ranch products. Perhaps most importantly, the partnership had taught Bob valuable lessons about land management and sustainable ranching practices. Maria's approach to working with the natural environment rather than against it had improved both the productivity and the long-term sustainability of his operation. As Christmas 1953 approached, Bob found himself reflecting on the remarkable changes that had occurred since that day 18 months earlier, when he had first discovered the family living in their makeshift shelter. What had begun as an awkward property dispute had evolved into one of the most rewarding partnerships of his life. The annual Christmas celebration had become a tradition for both families, but this year's gathering was especially meaningful. Joseph was now established as a junior partner in the ranch operation. Anna had been accepted to the preparatory school and would begin attending in the fall of 1954. Thomas was thriving in school and had become something of a local expert on desert wildlife, often guiding visitors who came to see Maria's artwork on tours of the local ecosystem. Maria herself had achieved recognition that extended far beyond the local community. Her agricultural techniques were being studied by researchers from several universities, and her artwork was being exhibited in galleries in Phoenix and Santa Fe. She had also begun writing a book about traditional Apache knowledge and its applications to modern desert living. During the Christmas dinner, Bob raised a toast that captured the essence of what the partnership had meant to both families. 2 years ago, I thought I was buying land, he said, looking around the table at the faces of people who had become as dear to him as his own family. What I actually bought was the opportunity to learn from some of the finest people I've ever known. Maria, Joseph, Anna, Thomas, you've taught me more about the land, about hard work, and about the importance of treating people with dignity and respect than I ever imagined possible. Maria's response was characteristic of the grace and wisdom she had shown throughout their relationship. Mr. Mackenzie, you gave us more than land or a house. You gave us hope and the chance to build a future. But most importantly, you treated us as equals when others saw only our differences. As the evening wound down and the families prepared to return to their respective homes, Bob looked out across the desert landscape that had brought them all together. In the distance, lights glowed from the Yazzie homestead, where a family that had once faced an uncertain future now lived in security and prosperity. The story that had begun with a simple property purchase had become something much more significant, a testament to the power of human kindness, the value of treating all people with dignity and respect, and the unexpected rewards that can come from taking chances on others. Years later, as the Yazzie children grew to adulthood and achieved successes that exceeded everyone's expectations, Bob would often tell people that buying that piece of land with its ramshackle shelter had been the best investment he had ever made. Not because of the financial returns, which were substantial, but because of the human connections and the lessons in compassion that had enriched his life immeasurably. Joseph would eventually become one of the most successful ranchers in Arizona, known throughout the state for his innovative approach to desert livestock management. Anna would earn a doctorate in mathematics and become a professor at a major university, while also continuing her artistic work. Thomas would follow his passion for wildlife and become a respected naturalist and author. Maria would live to see her great-grandchildren playing in the desert where she had once struggled simply to survive. Her book about traditional Apache knowledge would become a classic text on sustainable desert living, and her artwork would be displayed in museums throughout the Southwest. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that day in 1952, when Bob Mackenzie first discovered the Yazzie family, would be the example it set for treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. In a time and place where prejudice and discrimination were common, Bob and the Yazzie family proved that people of different backgrounds could work together as equals, each contributing their unique strengths to create something better than either could achieve alone. The story of the rancher who bought a wrecked shack and found a family inside became a local legend, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when people looked beyond surface differences to recognize the fundamental humanity and potential in others. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries are not the ones we set out to make, but the ones that find us when we are open to recognizing the value in every person we encounter.